Well, welcome to the season finale of the pod. And I know you're sad. I won't be in your ears weekly making you laugh and dropping truths, but rest assured, we'll be back in July. So just a brief hiatus for the summer so I can lay out in the sun and tan and relax. I really wanted to go out this season with a bang. So I brought you a big guest, someone I've fangirled over, loved, admired, deeply trusted, to talk about a really interesting topic. And today we're going to talk about employees just want trust and to be trusted. And what does that all even mean? So joining me today is Minda Harts. Minda Harts is a best-selling author, workplace consultant, and sought-out keynote speaker who is redefining what it means to build trust in the workplace. Through her groundbreaking 7 Trust Languages framework, she helps organizations create cultures where trust isn't just a value, it's actually a strategic advantage. As the author of The Memo, Right Within, and You Are More Than Magic, Minda has empowered thousands to be their own best advocates and navigate workplace challenges with confidence. Her impact spans boardrooms, conference stages worldwide, and working with companies like Nike, Google, Best Buy, Zoom. God, you're so impressive. Calling her to drive meaningful change. She's also been recognized by LinkedIn as the #1 top voice in workplace and by Business Insider as one of the top 100 people transforming businesses. Minda, welcome back to the pod.
Thank you for having me, my friend. Honored to be here.
I'm so excited. I don't know if you could tell from how amped I was getting while reading your bio. I was like more and more excited. I'm mostly excited because we've been talking about, you're on the pod last year and you had just announced that you were writing this book about trust. And here you are a year later and we actually get to talk about it.
I know. I'm so geeked too. So thank you.
Same. Okay. So before we get to all the things about trust, which I love talking about, every season I pick a question and I ask every guest who comes on the pod that season. This season's question is, what's one truth about work you wish more leaders understood?
Ooh, that's such a great question. I wish that more people understood that you could have trust at 9 a.m. and one action could erode trust by 9:10. And if we understood that every decision that we make has an impact and that impact either enhances or erodes, maybe we'll make better choices.
Oh God, I have been there too. That's such a good truth because it all takes one thing, one poorly written Slack, one question about something that you already explained in an email that they could have just read the email instead of asking you, where's this thing, that can just absolutely obliterate the trust that you have with that person and the trust that you feel. And that leads me to my first question, what inspired you to develop this concept of trust languages for the workplace?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question because I realized that, or what people may not know is that they're going to spend 90,000 hours of their life in the workplace. Okay. And so that you might need a tissue to wipe the tears from that. But if you love your job, then you're like, yes, I love it here. So people will spend so much time and we will expect trust in our romantic relationships. We'll expect it in our platonic. Why wouldn't we expect that same feeling or demonstration inside a place we spend so much time on? And I started to think about that. We talk about the 5 trust languages in our cultural zeitgeist. And if you're words of affirmation or quality time, okay, well, what would that mean in a professional setting? And so it really made me think about, do we have a trust issue in the workplace or do we have a communication crisis where an expectation that I feel is important is not being met, therefore it's eroding trust, but you may or may not know that, right?
Yeah,
and so I wanted to be able to give language to what happens when you need to ask for trust and what should happen when you know that it's not there and you need to build it.
Yeah, there have been relationships I've had at work where I'm like, there's no trust. Where every decision I make gets, debated. And in HR, right, a lot of our work it requires trust because you are impacting people's experience and potentially their livelihood. And so to operate without trust in HR is almost impossible. So I love that you added a language to it because you're right. Everyone's I'm words of affirmation. I'm this, I'm that. We always try to find ways to define ourselves. I'm a Pisces, right?
Right.
I am a persuader on the predictive index thing. I lead with my Gallup strengths, right? We're all trying to do that, but no one's really talking about it in the sense of trust. And I think especially for HR people, we have to deal with the employees potentially never fully trusting us. Everyone has what they think about HR outlined, right? don't trust them. They're there for the company. And so like thinking about having a framework for languages to talk about trust as like a real currency at work is so interesting to me.
Well, you hit it on the head. I mean, trust has to be the currency going forward, because if you're in Tokyo or you're in North Dakota, you know what it feels like when trust is present, and you know what it feels like when it's gone, right? And so trust isn't just a nice to have and some like kumbaya type of thing. It's also good for business. You know, all the studies show when trust is present, employees are 21% more productive, 50% more retention, 40% less burnout. So it's also nice to have, but it's also good for the bottom line. And so, you know, that part.
It's a business imperative, like all the other things. Like I just think sometimes like those things feel so intangible that it's hard to define them. So I love that you put a framework to it. And we're going to talk about that soon enough. But you mentioned something that was really interesting to me, a communication crisis in modern workplaces. What are some of the symptoms of this crisis and that most organizations might be experiencing that they don't even realize maybe?
Yeah, you know, it goes back to this expectation. If you're my manager and I tell my friend at work, oh, I don't trust her, she doesn't care about me, she hates me, she's not invested in my success, right? That's the narrative that I'm creating in my mind that may or may not be true. But if we get under the hood of why don't I trust you? Oh, could it be that I just need a little more feedback from you on a certain project? And could that help restore a little bit of trust? But you don't know to give me that. And I don't know how to tell you that I need it. Right.
Yeah.
So now there's this expectation and this communication breakdown. But if you knew that I needed more feedback on my projects, that's going to help you provide something to me, and that's going to provide me something to you. And so I feel like most of it could be trust issues, but it's also just this communication of expectations. And if we understood those expectations in the workplace, we would spend more time on actually getting our work done versus the emotions that we're feeling behind why somebody is doing something to us or not doing something, right?
Yeah, work feels so emotional sometimes. I hate to like say it, but like that's really, sometimes I'm like, I need to be in therapy for just my work relationships, like romantic relationships aside. I need therapy for my work relationships because it gets really to the core of like how we feel about the things that are happening and communicating. And I don't think many people are natural good communicators.
I agree.
I don't know if it's because we all grew up reading, talking, speaking differently. I don't know if it's because in the workplace, like we're all play acting as these professionals who say circle back, but it feels like no one knows how to communicate well. And like that is the core to building trust. It's like, how do you all talk and convey things or write things down? Like it's just feels like it's missing. And then so many people are like, there's no trust here. And it's like, well, we haven't done anything to build it.
Right. I mean, you hit it on the head. I think people want trust to be automatic, right? If you're in a position of leadership, you're like, it's my title, you should trust me automatically. Okay, but you've done nothing to earn that trust. And then on the other side of the coin, if there is a trust breakdown, you can't just go to your supervisor and say, I don't trust you. You're not going to get what you need. So I'm like, okay, what if we provide the language for people to be able to not just get the trust language that I need met so I can do my best work, but also if I'm a leader, what does Minda need from me, right? To do her best work? What does trust look like? Because nobody's going around the workplace with a crystal ball saying, what does Minda need from me today?
It feels like that some places, though, to be clear. It feels like
we
that.
want that. It's kind of like being in a relationship, right? And saying, you don't know what my favorite ice cream is after 5 years. It's like, well, yeah, but I know all these other things too.
I don't think those are really important things about you.
Yeah. So, but just tell me that I want a chocolate chip cookie dough blizzard from Dairy Queen. And then I understand what you need from me to trust me again, right? So we need that bridge, if you will, to help.
It's so interesting. My last performance review. I love that I just talked about my performance reviews, but here I am. One thing my CEO said to me that like really stood out to me, like I left it and I was like crushed that quarter. Like I always give myself a meets expectations. I'm like, I'm not going above, I'm like meeting expectations. But the one thing he wrote in my feedback was he was like, I really trust you in your decision-making process. And I was like, we have been working together almost 3 years. It's been a journey. We definitely agree on a lot of things. We definitely disagree on a lot of things. And we have worked really hard to build a strong relationship. And when he finally said it in my performance review, like, I really trust you. Like, I trust that the decision that we're going to get to in the end is one that I would also make. Maybe we have different ways of getting there, but it's going to be the same at the end. And I like left that and I was like, I won. Like, that's it. Like, it's a continual process, right? We're going to keep building trust. But I felt so seen that he finally said, like, I really do trust you. And I think like more people want that and crave that and need that.
I'm so glad you had that experience because most of us won't get that, right? So we have to help coach some of those people in our life to say, okay, well, if you're not going to ever say that to me, here's what trust looks like in my world, right? I'm so glad you got that affirmation, that acknowledgement.
Trust me, it was such like a moment. I like almost closed my computer and cried. He doesn't even know about this. He's going to listen to this episode and be like, oh God. But truly, I was like, we have built this. And it's so interesting because in your book, you discuss not just building trust, like, right? I think a lot of us default to how do I build it? But I think the big thing we should talk about is like, how do you repair it when it's broken? Like, why did you include that in the book too?
I thought it was important because I think a lot of people are from the denomination of you can't, once it's broken, it's broke, right? And there's no second chances. And in my mind, I feel like if trust can be built, then it can be broken. And if it can be broken, it can be rebuilt. But part of that, again, is setting an expectation for what good looks like. And I feel like through these 7 trust languages that we'll talk a little bit more about, that it gives people the language to say, oh, the breakdown happened when you didn't acknowledge me for X, Y, and Z. So now that I understand what's underneath the root of trust, I can articulate, here's how we do that. Or if you broke the trust intentionally, unintentionally, because I don't think anybody shows up in the workplace and says, who can I erode trust with today? I don't think we're that sinister. Might be 1 or 2 out there, but that's not the intention, right? And so if you knew, oh man, there was a breakdown in the communication and the expectation, what they need from me to restore this or to demonstrate restoration is going to be more follow through because that's what they asked for and I dropped the ball, right? And I think part of that is first acknowledging that we are going to make mistakes, but even when we acknowledge in those moments, we're taking accountability. And I think that the word reciprocity came up a lot in the book because we want trust from other people. Don't you think they want that back from us? And so we have to reciprocate that in the workplace. You know, I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but early in our careers, you start and they're like, okay, don't steal the pens, don't take the paper clips home, like do all this stuff, right? Because if you do those things, that would be like, you're not trustworthy. Right now, there's this expectation on employees. If you're working from home, don't watch RuPaul's Drag Race all day long, right? There's this expectation for that. But we also have to say, okay, as a leader, what's the expectation of me when trust is not, or I inherit a team that has low trust? What do I need to do to repair that? Yeah, it might not have been my fault, but what language do they need from me in this moment to even start to demonstrate that it's possible? And I think people, especially at this time in our lives and in our workplaces, they want to be acknowledged. And even if you're not calling something what you called it a year ago, they still want that demonstration that we can still trust here. And I feel like we're just not having the adult conversations in the workplace that we need to have.
I think like just on trust, it feels like a really vulnerable topic. And that's like, I mean, like I grew up in the place of work where everyone was like, don't be vulnerable. Never let anyone see you cry. Don't let anyone see you be weak. And now there's like, be vulnerable, show them you're struggling. I'm like, okay, I can do that too. But also there's a lot of vulnerability with it. And I'm somebody who like pours her heart and soul and wears her heart on the sleeve. And you know what you're getting with me. I think for a lot of leaders, they just don't really understand how to be vulnerable. And they don't understand that the lack of doing that also then impacts someone's ability to like trust you and have conversations about trust.
Absolutely. And let's be honest, most people, when you say that trust isn't present, then that's a negative thing, right? And nobody wants to admit that trust isn't here or it doesn't live here anymore or never did. And I think part of that, again, is saying, okay, maybe a year ago we talked about inclusivity and belonging in this way. Things have changed due to X, Y, and Z. I want to acknowledge that that is true, but we still care about our employees and we're going to continue to demonstrate that regardless of what it is. I know for me, as an employee, that's going to make me trust a little bit more when it's been shaky. right? Because now you're talking to me like I'm a human first and an employee second. And I think trust is essentially humanizing respect, right? Respect begets respect. And if we can just make trust great again in the workplace, then we get to restore some of that humanity again.
Yeah, one would hope. One would hope. I love that.
I'm an optimist.
I am too. As dark as I get, sometimes I have a very dark sense of humor. I also just believe in like our ability to change and be better and fix things. Like, I don't think any relationships are lost. Sometimes I tend to have a scorched earth mind where I'm like, oh, that relationship is broken. Nothing can fix it. But I think if we started asking ourselves more, like, maybe it's not broken, maybe something is just like missing. And that thing could be trust. God, your book is so good. I'm so excited we're talking about this. I'm like geeking out right now. Okay, anyways. You write about trust violations in the workplace. We touched on a few at the beginning. What are some common other examples and how could they maybe impact people different based on their trust languages?
Yes. So one thing that people can think about once they get the book is what their primary trust language is, what their secondary and their tertiary, right? And maybe for some of you, you're one of those people, I need them all to some degree. But all of them. But sometimes people can't give you all of those things. But if they could start with one tangible thing, then that's a beautiful way to begin. But what I will say is some of the erosions of trust, again, every scenario that we encounter in the workplace, there's an impact, and that impact either enhances or erodes, again, intentionally, unintentionally. That could be our famous micromanaging, right? For the people who...
Too real.
That is the fastest way to erode trust with your team, is a micromanager. I've yet to meet somebody, I don't know about you, correct me if I'm wrong, you meet a lot of people who say, I love a micromanager.
Never met a single human being on earth.
Okay, so that erodes trust because we want our anonymity. We are adults. You hired us for a reason, right? Again, that is not okay. Gossiping, bullying inside the workplace, another fast way to erode trust, maybe unintentionally, but it's happening. I think also not sticking to our word. But part of that is even when you have to make a different choice, acknowledging that, hey, we thought you'd all be hybrid for the rest of your lives, but now we realize that's not possible. And here's the reasons why. And let's work to get back into the office a few days a week, right? Instead of like, get your tail back here in next week and that's it. If you want a job, great. If you don't, find a new one.
Yeah.
Those,
a lot of organizations were doing, like.
But yet you want them to be employee of the month next week and work as hard as they possibly can. You can't work under that.
Doesn't work like that.
Stress and anxiety and fear, right? And so again, understanding that these things happen, they're happening as we're having this conversation, and there are ways in which we can eliminate some of these things, right? And I think we just have to be aware that two things can be true. We can work at the same place and experience that workplace differently.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I wrote about this say-do gap like a year or two ago where you say one thing and then do another. And for HR, I think this is like the number one thing if you're going to do anything as an HR person, it's do the thing you say you're going to do. Even if you like run a survey, forget to share the results, and 3 months later, you're like, hey, we ran a survey and we actually forgot to share the results. Even saying that you forgot to do the thing actually still builds the trust.
Yes.
But if you say one thing like, oh, we don't promote assholes here, and then you promote the asshole person who's been a jerk to everybody else, it's just like you're never going to be able to build trust. You got to walk the walk and talk the talk. Like you can't talk out of one side of your mouth. I just use like 3 analogies in one.
And they all work very perfectly. And trust, listen, trust at the end of the day has to be a noun and a verb. And again, when we don't demonstrate both sides of the coin, then what are we're saying to our employees or to our colleagues that, you know, we don't give a damn. And if we do, then we're going to at least try to make trust the main character every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so good. Okay. So we touched a little bit on the trust languages, but I would love just like a brief overview of the 7 trust languages and why they're so fundamental to workplace relationships.
I love this so much. And I hope that more and more will start to use these, but maybe you'll see yourself in these. But one of the first ones is transparency. And essentially that's clarity and honesty. Security is that psychological safety and belonging, both intellectually, mentally, and physically. So even when you give an idea in the team meeting, that someone doesn't run off with your intellectual prowess and make it their own. So we want that security in there. We want demonstration. We talked about doing what you say you're going to do. Feedback is that meaningful and consistent insight. Acknowledgement is seeing people and their work. Sensitivity is being mindful of our actions, being mindful of the impact in which we say. And lastly, follow through, keeping our word. And so I feel like if we're, at least if each of us are speaking one of those languages in the workplace, it's going to be a better workplace than last night.
I need all of those, actually. How do I pick my primary one? I feel like I need them all. You were just like listing them and I was like, yeah, I need that. Wait, I need that. Also, I need that. And yep, that too.
Well, that's the fun thing about the book that I want everyone to go and get, because I have scripts, I have assessments to help you figure out what your primary and secondary. And then also, not just because we talked about trust being a two-way street, it isn't just what we get out of the workplace, but how do we identify someone on our team that might need more feedback from us? How do we find that out, right? Even if they're not aware of what the 7 trust languages are, we could still ask people, what does trust look like to you?
I love that. And I also just like I love frameworks. I'm such a framework dork because it's just easier to explain to everybody else, like what's going on and what you need. And I think a lot of times employees struggle to figure out what it is that's bugging them.
Mm-hmm.
Like they know it's something, but they don't know how to explain it. And then they don't know how to explain the impact sometimes. And I think for us as HR, like being able to say like, hey, do you think trust is missing? Like, is it one of these 7 things that you wish you had more of? And really trying to understand from them what it is they want. And I mean, we talk about love languages. I feel like that became like very common in our vernacular. Like everyone talking about what my love languages are. And I default to one. I think mine's like acts of services, actually, because I love acts of services.
I'm a words of affirmation girl.
I also think I'm that one too, to be clear. I think when I took the test, those were like the top 2 for me. Because I'm like, I need you to, yeah. Anyways, that's an episode for a different day about my love languages. But do most people actually have a primary trust language they prefer? Like, or is it that, like I said, I want all 7 of them, which is impossible?
I think at the core of it, because we're human, we want them all, right? We want all the things. We're greedy. We want all the trust languages. But the reality is, there's somebody sitting listening to us right now, and they're saying, why does it take all that? Just do your job and get your paycheck, right? But if you want a more trusting environment, you're going to be like, you know what? I can't speak all 7, but if one of these is most important to you and that's follow through, I can do that. Right? Yeah. Because I have 50 people on my team. I can't memorize. I can't do it all. Right? And over time, I think once we get that muscle going, you'll see that you're actually speaking maybe 3 of these languages at a time. Right? But we have to have a place where people can feel grounded in, because we are busy. So if I know that as your colleague, you need more demonstration from me, then I'm going to demonstrate what you need, not just the one-time event, but try to, follow through it eventually as well. And so I'm just hoping that this helps us create a better sense of understanding with each other. Because again, even if you make up a scenario in your head that this person isn't going to give me what I want, they're not doing this, but if they don't know what to do or that you need it, then they can't build trust with you. And I think this takes the power back in a situation that we might feel is hopeless.
Yeah, I was just saying make up scenarios in my head. I've never done that before. Do it all the time. Making up stories. Like, that's the other thing too. Like, I always say this about employees. Like, they will interpret what they will from a scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So if you actually spend the time and build that trust with them, potentially that interpretation isn't so wild that it's going to take a lot to come back from that. But if you don't tell them what's going on or show them that you are to be trusted, I just think everyone will potentially assume the worst. I think a lot of advice people have been given about HR is like, they're not your friend. They're there for the business. Assume the worst that they're going to do. And I think of these trust languages as an opportunity to show employees we are to be trusted.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying our hardest to like build a workplace that is for the business and for the employees. At the end of the day, like all of us have a responsibility to the business. Nobody is showing up to work from the goodness of their heart.
True.
If I had to show up to work for the goodness, I would not be here. You would catch me on a beach. I'd be like, what's up? And I got 16 books in the beach with me. Like, so I think there's something to be said here, especially for HR people, as we're thinking about like trust in an organization, not just between leader and direct report or manager and direct report. It's like trust in the organization. Like I feel like play a big part in that. I would not say it's our core responsibility, but I think we can be at the helm to build organizations where employees feel such a high sense of trust that they can only show up and do their best work rather than creating fictional stories in their head.
Absolutely. And I talk a lot about HR in the book because I feel like everybody loves to hate HR
Always.
in the workplace. And so what would that look like for HR to be the role model for what sensitivity looks like in the workplace, for transparency, for acknowledgement, for security, for feedback, for follow through, for demonstration? And I feel like then people can see that. But a lot of people will create the narrative that HR doesn't like me. They're here, like just as you said. And we also have to articulate what we need from HR as well and build those relationships and vice versa. But I definitely feel like the workplace can't sustain around thinking that HR is the enemy, right? And so, because that's supposed to be like the trusted place to go. And I also think that leaders and managers have to also empower HR to make those decisions where they're benefiting both. They're not put in a corner, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of competing interests, I think, that happen in the workplace that could erode trust. But we, as the next generation and going into the future of work, we get to decide what type of workplaces we want to have. And if trust is important, then it's going to continue to be a great place to work.
Yeah, I really do think we have a trust issue in HR. I always tell people, like, when you're dealing with employees, assume you're starting from the negative instead of the positive, because everybody, myself included, has a bad story to tell about HR or an HR experience. And then I think the other issue is, like, a lot of times we're put in situations that aren't even our doing. Like, we have to execute something that we never even wanted to do. And it's on us to speak up and say, this is like the wrong thing to do. We have to do the right thing. Otherwise, then we end up executing the wrong thing, and then trust is obliterated all over again.
All over again. And we can't afford businesses cannot afford to have trust in the basement. You know, it has to be in the room every time, and it can't be a one-time event. It has to be a cultural workplace lifestyle.
Yeah. This conversation is sparking like so much for me, just like in my experience in HR and as an employee. Like, was there a particular moment for you where you were like, and that's how you ended up developing these like 7 trust languages?
Well, yes, there was. For one of them is when I was in my former life in the workplace, I would get so frustrated with my manager, one in particular, and I'd be like, I don't trust him. He doesn't want me to be successful. And I create the story, right? And then I started to take a step back and I'd be like, wait a second. He doesn't know that you need more feedback from him. What would it look like if you actually created a conversation in which, I really love to hear from you on certain projects. I've completed 5 and you haven't told me if we went the right direction, if there's some room for improvement. I just really feed off of having that conversation. Is that something we can partner on more? And once I told him that, he's like, I didn't know you needed that. Okay, yeah, sure. And we were able to open up the dialogue, right? And I was like, okay, well, maybe it wasn't that I don't trust you. It's just I have to communicate in a way that you see me and I see myself, right? And I think part of that, I realized it wasn't necessarily a trust issue. It was a communication issue, but they trust and transparency and vulnerability, all those things go together. And then when people would reach out to me in my DMs or after a talk, people would say, I don't trust my manager. I don't trust HR. And what I realized, no matter if it was a white male in North Dakota, right, or, a Black woman in Los Angeles, what they were saying was the same thing of what they wanted, but they didn't know how to articulate what that was. And it kept falling in one of these 7 kind of buckets. And so it made me think about what we need to be talking is each other's language, and how we build trust is different, just like in the love languages, right? How you build love is different. And if I knew that you needed that, could we solve and save a relationship that could go astray?
I think so. So
Yeah.
many work relationships are just like mirrors of romantic relationships too. You said it at the beginning. It's like,
Yeah.
why do we expect all these things from our partner or our best friends, but don't come to expect them from work? And it's like, I think that disconnect is really what's causing this like trust issue to bubble up is we seem to have it in all these other facets of our life, but we can't seem to get it at work. It's like, why? And I think sometimes it's because we have to do the work with our work relationships that we didn't necessarily think we should have to do, maybe.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to why don't they know I like cookie dough
Cookie dough.
blizzards, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, well, because we never talked about it. But I feel like, they say eight out of 10 people will leave a job that they essentially love, but because conflict arises and they don't want to have the conversation, they'll leave. And so I'm suggesting that why don't we give ourselves permission to have a conversation before we leave to find out if we could actually get what we want, right? And similar to our romantic and platonic relationships, after a while, you're going to say to your partner or to your friend, like, this isn't working for me,
Mhm.
right? And you're going to say that 9 times out of 10, you're not going to just walk out of the door and then never say the thing that was the problem,
Yeah.
right? There is ghosting, but typically you say it. And so I think we need to normalize having conversations about needs and wants and desires inside the workplace as it relates to the work that we're doing. And I just think that for so long it was just do your work, but now we are told to bring our authentic selves to work. So my
Mm.
authentic self in the workplace
Well,
needs more transparency. So let's talk about
yeah.
that.
No, I mean, that's fair. Like,
Yeah.
it's so funny. Like, if I have had a friend ghost a friend relationship that was like a decade-long relationship
Mhm.
out of fear of conflict.
Yeah.
And I knew that about her. And I was like, if you had just told me, like, you don't want to be friends anymore, I probably would have been like, so sad to hear that. Like, wish you the best.
Yeah.
Or we could have resolved the conflict. But like, so many people don't want to. That's stat 8 out of 10. That's wild. I'm going to think
It
about
is.
that all day.
It's wild. And I'm thinking, wait a second, you worked so hard to get in this role, right?
Yeah.
To do the work that you love. Give yourself that conversation. At least now you can find out if what you thought was true or not, right? Again, back to the stories that we tell ourselves about why. And it could confirm some things, but it could be you were completely wrong. Very short story is when I was in my former 9 to 5, my manager was retiring and I took over their workload. And so this whole time I thought, oh my God, I'm about to wear the crown. I'm going to take over, right? Everybody was like looking to me for this. And I felt like, okay, this is my time. And then they end up hiring somebody from the outside that had less experience, right? And I felt crushed. I felt like the trust I had, I'm going to get on Indeed or wherever it was at the time, and I'm going to find me a new job, right? And then I kept creating this narrative in my head that they hate me. It's because I'm this. It's because I'm that. All of these things that may or may not be true. And then I was making myself sick because I'm like, oh, I'm not good enough, all these things. So I garnered up some courage and I went to have a conversation with the person who made the decision. And I said, I'm really a little disappointed because I had the assumption that this was going to happen and it didn't. And they're like, well, you never articulated that you wanted it. And I'm like, wait, just a darn second. And part of it, I had just I'm like, oh man, well, I was doing all these things. I was taking over there. And they're like, yeah, but you never said that you wanted it. And I'm like, okay, those are a lot of different issues and layers. But part of it was I had to have the conversation. Otherwise, I had created this whole reason as to why they weren't doing it, why they did it. And I had to find out the answer, right? So that I can understand and not keep eroding trust inside my mind. But now we can maybe start to fix it. And now we were able to have a conversation. And, 6 months later, I did get a promotion in a different department. But the conversation had to happen, right? The expectation had to be initiated by me. And I know oftentimes people are like, well, we're tired of doing the work. Why is it always the employee? But the reality is we sometimes just won't have a manager that's going to have the emotional intelligence that we want them to have.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like a sense of privilege because there's nothing I won't say Like, there's no conversation, no conflict I'm not afraid to have, but it took me like a really long time to get there.
Mhm.
And I realized from meeting so many people and talking about like my love of conflict that so many people are like, absolutely not. I hate that. That gives me anxiety and stress. And so I think something too, just as HRs, as we're thinking about like trust and conflict and all these things, it's like, how do we create a space for people to feel like there can be conflict that is had that is resolved in a healthy manner? I think that's the piece is like so many of us have seen conflict end poorly. And so then
Mhm.
we tend to avoid it. But what I've always said is like, I don't know what I don't know. Like if an employee comes to me and is telling me a story, I'm like, the manager's probably not telling me these things. So if I could create a space where they feel safe with me to like come and tell me about the thing, then I can actually build the trust with them. Like I can leave the conversation and say, here's what I can do for you. Here are my next steps. Instead of them just assuming that I know what's going on. Employees, I feel like, assume all the time that I know everything happening. And I'm like, I don't know what you're doing day to day, right?
Mhm.
Like I'm HR. I don't have time to figure out what you're doing every day. But then they come to us and they're like, well, we thought you knew that this manager was micromanaging us. And I was like, how would I have known that? How would I have known that? So like you
Yeah.
got to build that path to like really get people to like want to come to you and have that conversation with you. And I'm glad that you were able to have that conversation eventually, but I know that definitely like took time and courage, honestly, that a lot of people don't feel safe enough doing that at work.
Yeah. 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 And actually pushed me to have more of those conversations because I think the reason why I also wrote the book is to give people the language to be able to say the hard things so
Yeah.
that we normalize it. It's okay to
Yeah.
have healthy conversations like this, to your
So
point.
healthy. I think something that's really interesting that I've been thinking about lately is return to work, remote, hybrid places. Like, I think a few years ago when we went fully remote, honestly, ever since COVID, the world's been different. Everyone's heard
Yeah.
me talk about it 1,000 freaking times. But I think remote and hybrid work like really dramatically changed workplace and dynamics. And so you wrote this book about trust, and I couldn't help but think like, how does this manifest in the virtual environment? Because that is like a whole new game. I think that
Hmm.
nobody knew how to play 5 years ago and is still trying to figure out how to play today.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. And I touch on that in the book too, because trust does look different. You used to be able to build trust in the break room
Yeah.
over, at the water cooler or whatever the case, or your one-on-one meetings that you got to sit face to face with your manager. So now trust looks a little bit different. And it may sound silly, but for some people, turning on your camera in a meeting is how you build trust. Because if you have a manager who doesn't believe in work from home and they think everybody's out at the beach, during work
I wish.
hours,
I
then
wish. Be for real.
we're actually working probably more at home. Okay, but that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
But so sometimes to build that trust, we might have to turn our camera on and show our face and let the couch be in the background or whatever, right? So that people see that you are doing the things you say you are. And I think, again, it goes back to trust being a noun and a verb. We have to demonstrate that. And it may seem futile to some of us, but that's what that other person needs on the other side. Or logging into the teams, right? And
No.
chiming in to the chat. Those are ways we demonstrate trust, right? Also, I think as a leader, we might have been able to say the thing or pop into somebody's cube a little more easily to articulate information. Now we have to be even more intentional about, did we just tell our go-to person or did we share that with the whole team?
Yeah.
Right? And really spending that time. So I think that there's a lot of ways that we can still build relationships. People are still getting promoted. People are still getting raises. People are being let go in these virtual environments. There's a lot taking place. So again, if we could work on some of those things, that even the small little things, every step is a building block towards trust. And I think we just have to remember again that people are human on the other side of this thing.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so I have like a hot take. I don't care if you work from the beach as long as the work gets done.
Same.
Like for me, I'm like, I probably default to too much trust.
Mhm.
And I need to work on that because I just think like if I'm being really clear with my expectations, I'm telling you what needs to get done.
Mhm.
I could give less fucks. Sorry. If you get it done at the beach, if you get it done when you're doing an errand, if you're going to the doctor, caregiving, parental, like all of
Mhm.
that. I just operate from such a different spot. But in the pandemic, do you remember in the early days, like literally March 2020, when they were like, oh my God, how are we going to know that anyone's doing work? And I was like, well, first of all, we're all trapped at home. So like,
we can't go anywhere.
we can't go anywhere. So like, unfortunately, I am doing a lot of work, more than I needed to be doing. And I just think like at the same time, like we can't just assume, I know we tend to do this as humans, like we assume the worst, but we can't just assume the worst. And they've done all these studies around like flexibility actually increases like people's productivity and like trust and all of that. And I think like, yes, the game is different that we're remote and hybrid, but it's also like we're adults. You said this at the very beginning. We're adults. People are not showing up to daycare. They're showing up to work.
Yeah.
So treat them like adults.
Listen, I could sit in my cube and talk to my person across the other side of me all day and do less work in the office. It doesn't matter where you are.
You're describing me. I am the office disruptor. I should not be allowed in an office because I will just disrupt everyone's work.
Yes. So back to your point of, okay, also, if I am projecting onto other people, let me give them some anonymity to be able to do certain things, like give feedback in a way that doesn't put them in harm's way when you're asking questions. So having those surveys or mechanisms or, giving people the autonomy to do the things they need to do and get their work done. I'm the same way. Listen, you can be in Puerto Vallarta for the next 6 months, but did we meet the deadlines? Okay, great. And I think we have to do that. If they were working for you and had a good track record in the office, why did that somehow become disruptive? Yeah. Give people the benefit of the doubt. And it's just, again, we want people to trust us. We have to be willing to give that trust as well.
It goes both ways. I love when people are like, I don't trust them. If they trust me, I'm like, false. If you don't trust them, they probably don't trust you.
It's not how trust works.
Yeah. I always think of those examples where it's like girlfriends who go through their significant others like phones. I'm like, that concept has like, first of all, never crossed my mind. I'm just like, if you're doing it, you're doing it. Like me going through is not going to stop it. I think about that in the workplace because it's like you don't want to be the kind of manager who has to go through the phone. Okay. You want to say, here's the work, here's the expectations, and please go achieve it. And when they don't, then you have to follow through and figure out why. Yeah. But if you're constantly going through the phone at the beginning, you're just losing it. And I think the other thing about like hybrid and remote work is like building the relationship in the beginning is so important. Like everyone talks about onboarding, but like the first 90 days, I would say the first 30 days, you better do the work. And if you don't have the space to do the work, like expect that the relationship is going to take even longer for you to get to that really good ideal spot where there's the trust both ways.
I'm so glad you said onboarding because I talk about that in the book too, because I feel like that it's part of the employee journey, right? From the moment they even hit the website to the moment the recruiter calls them on the phone, like the 90 days, the 120 days, all of it matters when we're building to retirement, right, of that place. The trust matters. And I feel like I'm just excited for us to have a reset moment to say, okay, let's make trust the main character. I don't know where maybe it's never been here, but I'm willing to try, right? And if we are all willing to try to speak each other's one language, then we get to create, again, better workplaces for ourselves and for the future.
Yeah. When people view work as transactional, that's like my first indication. Like work is transactional, to be clear. I'm not an idealist here. I'm not going here to be like, it is transactional. But when you only view it as transactional, I think like building that trust becomes like even harder to actually do. And you're right. Like it should be a main character in the room with us, especially other departments may be different, but for HR, if you do not have trust with your leaders, with your managers, with your executives, I report to the CEO, so I'll use CEO as an example, your job is going to be, I would say, frankly, near impossible. Because we do so much to impact an org, to change an org, to like drive initiatives forward, to hire people. Like trust has to be at the core of everything we do. Otherwise, like our work is not going to go very far.
Well said.
I just can't, I can't stress that enough. Okay. For somebody who is just beginning to explore this trust language concepts, other than reading your book, which they have to do, you have to promise to do that if you're listening. What's one first practical step you'd recommend they take?
I think that the first practical step is thinking about what does trust look like to you, because I think that oftentimes we don't even ask ourselves what trust looks like. And when we start to kind of write that out and do that exercise, we're going to find that we fall into one of these 7 or a few different buckets about what we want, right? And so once we understand that, then we can start to craft, okay, how do I ask for it if I'm not getting that? And then also too, looking at some of the cues of our colleagues and things. What are they constantly asking you for that you keep maybe dropping the ball on or not providing? And for example, I think a language that we all can start today is the language of sensitivity, because everybody needs that. There's a lot going on in the workplace. There's a lot going on around the world. And so is what I'm about to tell you going to enhance trust or erode trust? If I wear that t-shirt or I wear that hat, is that going to enhance trust or is that going to erode trust? Or if I just say something very flippant in an email and I CC someone who has no business being CC'd, am I being sensitive to enhancing trust or eroding trust? So I think if each of us just takes a pause and thinks about how the impact of our decision is going to hit somebody else, then I feel like we again usher in more respect and dignity inside the workplace. And I think it helps us make less mistakes, right? Because we're slowing down. So I just hope that everyone will be willing to be a little more sensitive in the climate that we're in, and understand that, again, we might work at the same place, but we experience that workplace differently. But at the core of it, we all want trust. So what can we do to move that needle forward?
This might be like God, I'm really full of hot takes today. This might be a hot take, but like if you're in HR and you don't open the news to see what's happening, like I'm not saying it needs to be your whole personality, but I'm saying maybe you should take 5 minutes every day to just understand what's happening in the world. So much is happening every day. But I feel like having that awareness, it just makes you a better leader, and especially in that sensitivity language. Like imagine you're watching the news and your community is impacted somehow. At this point, every community, I feel like, is being impacted every day with lots of awful things. But then you roll into a one-on-one and you, with no sensitivity whatsoever, just go in on that person. Don't even ask them if they're ready to give feedback. You just give them the feedback. It's really hard. It becomes really uncomfortable. What do you think is the outcome of that experience? That trust was just diminished.
Within seconds. Right. And I think that's the part of it, because if I would have been more culturally aware or understanding what's going on in the media, I might even say, you know what, Minda, let's schedule that one-on-one till next week. We don't need to have that today. Right. I'm being sensitive because I know that I don't have to go into it all. I may not even have the words to say as a leader, but I saw that, okay, this might be impacting her community. This conversation isn't necessary today. Let's table this. Right. That's going to hit me so hard and be like, wow, thank you. That settles down my nervous system. We're ushering in a little bit more trust. Each and every one of us can do that. I'm not asking for us to create a $1 trillion initiative on trust here. This is something we all can do today.
Yeah. It is wild though. And people will say like, I don't have to, HR is not political, or I don't need to read the news, or I shouldn't have to talk about politics at work. I'm not telling you to do any of those things. I'm just telling you to like be aware that the world outside is impacting how people show up. And if you care and trust and you want to build trust with people, the biggest surefire way to ruin it is to act like their existence does not matter.
Yep.
And I think about that all the time. I'm on LinkedIn complaining about it. I'm like, y'all need to do more, do better. Anyways, I like to end every episode with like a little bit of future, maybe a little bit of advice. So let's hit with the future. What's your hope for how this book will impact workplace cultures in the coming years?
My hope is that Talk to Me Nice, the 7 trust languages for a better workplace, will be part of onboarding in all managerial training.
I love that. I'm manifesting that, because there's so many things that we don't do to prepare people in onboarding already, and managers building trust pays dividends. I have one of the best working relationships in my direct report I've ever had with anyone right now, and it's because we put in the work to learn each other and to trust one another. And I never have to worry if I told her that one thing, did she get it done? If I mentioned this, like, what is it like? I don't know. It fills me with so much joy and achievement every day. So I can only imagine like other managers want to feel the same.
Absolutely.
And then finally, I mean, you've given us like one step to begin exploring the trust languages concept. But if there's one thing someone can do after listening to this episode, what's one thing they can go do?
Other than buy the book, get that in your cart, or call your local library if you're not able to purchase it. But I would just say, think about how trust is showing up, right? Think about even those relationships that you could go back and repair. There's an action that maybe you need to take, right? Maybe it happened 30 days ago, but going back to that person, say, hey, remember what I said in that meeting last week? My intention wasn't that, but after thinking about it, I just wanted to check in with you. I apologize. That's gonna send a ripple saying, okay, I could trust this person maybe again, right? And so as much as we want people to show up for us, let's also think how we're showing up for others.
I love that. That's a mic drop moment. For those who are looking to get in touch with you, I always link to LinkedIn. I always link to a website to buy the book. How else can people, if they want to talk to you, book you, do whatever, how do they get in touch with you?
Yes, definitely follow me on LinkedIn, and then feel free to go to mindaharts.com.
I am just so thankful, one, that you continue to agree to come back to this podcast.
It's one of my favorites, so it's always a yes, always a yes.
Well, I mean, your work, first of all, I admire so much, and it's so impactful to just the experience HR people are having. Like, we want to work in better workplaces. We want to build trust with one another. So I just want to say thank you so much. I love everything you're doing, from all the cool projects you have going on. It's so much fun to follow you, to see all the cool stuff you're doing in LA. I'm like, oh my God. So thank you for coming back to the pod, and you'll be back in the future. I'm sure of it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're the best.